From your favorite podcatchers and our YouTube channel featuring scenic videos, this is Kaiju Vision Radio, Episode 12, Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. Hello G-fans and kaiju lovers, and welcome to Kaiju Vision Radio, a podcast about the appreciation of giant monster movies
and discovering their historical and cultural value.
I'm Brian Scherschel.
And I'm Nathan Marchand.
And today we will be going into a new film completely in the series. It is a very different one than any one that we have done yet. It is a really archetypal movie, if you didn't know that, it is. But it's fun. I love it, and we'll have a good time discussing it.
Yep, so we'll be going over Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, or, as it's more commonly known in the United States, Godzilla versus the Sea Monster.
Our related topic for this episode is Japan's population and societal changes and their effect on movie audiences. As with every episode, we'll begin with a short description of the film, followed by our opinion and discussion. Take it away, Nate. You're listening to Kaiju Vision Radio.
Godzilla is an anti-hero. He's primarily a force of nature, showing no regard for the safety of humans, hero and villain alike. He even attacks Mothra when she comes to rescue everyone. At other times, he's a character exhibiting human-like behaviors such as taunting Ebirah and seeming to have an affection for Dio. Ebirah is a vicious giant lobster who attacks any ship that enters his territory, often eating any unfortunate humans he finds. He occasionally acts anthropomorphically when battling Godzilla. Mothra sleeps for most of the movie while the Shobijin and her people pray for her to rescue the slaves on Devil's Island. Ryota Kane is a young country boy who steals a yacht in order to find his brother Yata, who was lost at sea. On board are his new friends Nita and Ichino, as well as Yoshimura, a suave and experienced thief on the run from the police. While at first annoyed with the boys, Yoshimura helps them with his thievery skills. Dio is a pious and feisty young woman from Infinite Island captured as a slave by Red Bamboo. Captain Ryui is a cruel officer in Red Bamboo, supervising their island base, where they're manufacturing material for nuclear weapons. The human and kaiju plot intermix is moderately high. The monsters are constantly influencing the human story, even if they're off-screen. The characters are often trying to avoid the monsters, utilize them, or prey to them. Yoshimura, Ichino, and Dio erect a makeshift lightning rod using a sword and some wire to awaken Godzilla as a distraction against the Red Bamboo. He battles Ebirah, driving him away. The problem is solved when Godzilla breaks through the Red Bamboo power line defenses and flattens their base, forcing them to activate their nuclear facility self-destruct. Godzilla battles Ebirah a second time, killing him. Mothra awakens and rescues the heroes and slaves away before the island explodes. This script is more indicative of Sekizawa's early 60s work. The story is simple and fun. The kaiju and human plots become more intertwined as the film progresses, with the monsters ultimately solving most of the conflicts. Budgets continue to decline with this entry. The setting was changed to an island in order to save money on miniatures. The Godzilla suit from Invasion of Astro Monster was reused here. Eiji Tsuburaya was busy with his own production company at the time, so the special effects were directed by Sadamasa Arikawa under Tsuburaya's supervision. Despite all this, the effects are solid. The Ebirah suit is well constructed, and the climactic exploding island is impressive. The movie is filmed very well. This film has a lighter tone than the previous two films. Both the human and kaiju storylines have elements of comic relief. The events of the film do have some gravity. Regardless, this is very much an escapist fantasy. This isn't a very experimental film because it's not that far off from what one would expect for a movie rooted in the second half of the 1960s. This movie is an expansion of style for the franchise because it created an entirely different flavor of Godzilla movie. It's the first Godzilla film aimed at a younger audience, in this case teens and youth, as exemplified by a cast of mostly young actors and a greater emphasis on action. This was the first Godzilla film directed by Jun Fukuda, who was known for his young guy films and crime thrillers. The script was originally written as an adaptation of Rankin Bass's King Kong cartoon series, but it was rejected. Not wanting it to go to waste, Sekizawa replaced Kong with Godzilla, which accounts for some of Godzilla's odd behavior. When released December 17, 1966, the film had an attendance of 3,450,000, with an additional 760,000 attendees when re-released in 1972. Released on American TV in 1968, it was the first Godzilla film not shown theatrically in the US. It received mixed reviews from the fanbase. The changes made in the dub version were minor. The original title sequence and one early scene were deleted. Neither Captain Ryui nor Ebirah were referred to by name. The rock music that plays during Godzilla and Ebirah's fights was removed. This film features a terrorist organization that, at least implicitly, has aspirations of world domination. They make several references to a headquarters, which means they're either a larger organization or funded by a nation. There's a brief glimpse of the Hickish parts of Japan, which features a medium performing a ceremony to view the Land of the Dead. There are brief clashes between Ryota the country boy and his new city slicker friends. A key theme in this film is using one's head to outthink enemies and overcome obstacles. Another is not to ignore those in need just because one is safe. The story touches on faith since Dio, the slaves, and the infant islanders steadfastly pray for Mothra to intervene on their behalf. Yoshimura finds redemption by using his thievery skills to help them escape and decides to go straight at the end of the film. Anti-nuclear sentiment is expressed by the heroes when they see Devil's Island destroyed. This concludes part 1 of the podcast. You're listening to Kaiju Vision Radio.
In part 2 of the podcast, we have an opinion and discussion of our film. So, Nate, what did you think of this movie?
You know, this is one that I watched a lot growing up. Now, because of all the preparation we've been doing for the podcast on this most recent viewing, I actually found myself liking it more.
I like it more every time I see it, but especially since I got the Blu-ray, I like it even more because it looks absolutely fantastic. But I think as a movie, this movie just gets a little bit too much heat from fans and from other people who watch it. I mean, this doesn't have a very good rating on anything that I've seen, as far as just IMDb or other various websites. It's not very well rated, and I think it's because this isn't supposed to be one of those grandiose movies that's like a rehashing of the original, and it's not supposed to be anything that it's not. You know, this is a very simple film overall for who it's meant to be for and what the purpose is.
I have a feeling, I mean, there's probably a multitude of factors for why it's not as well liked by the fan base. It's usually not ranked as the worst, obviously, but it's not usually ranked as the best either, which I think is a fair assessment. It's much different than what has come before, and like you said, it isn't as big and grandiose, you know, and there are reasons for that, but it never ceases to be entertaining. I do wonder if part of the reputation that it has is because this is one of 2 Godzilla movies that made it onto Mystery Science Theater 3000. I've seen both of the Godzilla episodes, and they're very entertaining. I don't remember them being mean to this movie. I think they saw the sincerity in it, for sure. It was just one of those movies where it was easy to make the jokes, I think is what it really boiled down to.
Well, they're going to find the movies that they think they're going to have the easiest time with, and they have their own estimate for how they do that. Just like they've had a lot of people that just sit around watching these horribly abysmal movies that don't even make it onto the show. But I think this one, it's a little bit not silly, but it's exotic. There's stuff actually happening in it, and there's actual, you know, something to make fun of, as opposed to just having one of those movies that it doesn't really lend to the jokes so much. But I don't know. Getting back to the movie's purpose, though, I think it was meant to be a South Seas adventure film, and it was meant for younger people, quite obviously. There was a big generational change by the time this movie was coming out. Mid-'60s, late 60s especially, where the new generation, the new post-war generation has become adults. And so we can really get into a different kind of entertainment for a different kind of generation, and I think that's what this is. They're not remaking Invasion of Astro Monster. That was just the year before this. They're not remaking the original film They're trying to do something different. And as I've said a million times already, I don't want to see the same thing over and over again. Seeing young people in this is really refreshing. I want to see that generational change take place. And Jun Fukuda knew how to do that. He was perfect for this. He made films on places like college campuses. And it seems like he would have been fun to work with on a movie like this. And Takarada, he's at his most Cary Grant-ish of any of the movies. He seems to work with the young actors very well. They seem to have a good rhythm to their acting. They seem to be comfortable.
I love Takarada in this movie, by the way.
To me, it seems like he could have been channeling like Cary Grant from 1955 and To Catch a Thief. There's that charm. There's that. The handsomeness is definitely going on. He's really good in this.
Well, and the other thing that he does is he acts as sort of as a mentor or a temperance for these young actors and these younger characters.
A little bit of a voice of reason.
Yeah, kind of a voice of reason, when they're being more impulsive or they're giving up on certain things, and he's telling them, no, think about things here a little bit more, or yes, we can take care of this.
Yeah, like do this instead.
Yeah.
And he's really helpful with them in the movie, and he seems to, I imagine if I was one of the younger actors, I probably would have looked to him as a mentor of some kind anyway. And so that makes sense in a meta kind of way too. Getting to the more technical aspect, Jun Fukuda really knows how to make a movie. He tells the story with the camera. He moves the camera around. He's following things. He's tracking the camera. He's doing quicker cuts. He's doing all kinds of nice technical things with this movie. And it helps to keep the movie going, momentum-wise. You can notice in these movies which ones are filmed better than the others. And this one particularly is better. The Blu-ray looks fantastic. It's filmed very, very well. It looks great. It's one of the best looking Godzilla Blu-rays that I've seen that have come out so far. You can really tell that it's a nice, clean print probably to begin with. It looks like it's been preserved well. And I think Fukuda really, really adds a lot to the Godzilla series with the movies that he made.
Which is ironic because, from what I've read, he wasn't fond of making Godzilla movies, but he was a good company man at the studio, so when he got the assignment, he made the best product that he could.
Yeah, I think he said something like only the original one should have been made, and they should have stopped there. But
yeah, which, like I said, is unfortunate because he left an indelible impression. Next to Ishiro Honda, he's the most prolific director to work on the franchise.
And I think maybe some of his work gets underestimated, maybe because the budgets were lessened a little bit as he came on and started making more of the movies. And so he had a little bit less wiggle room as far as, he had to probably make less of a great film than he wanted to. Like, he probably wanted to make something better, but obviously the budget probably hemmed him in after a while here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It also doesn't help that he tends to get a bit of a bad rap because he made some of the lesser entries of the franchise. I mean, he did most of the 70s movies, and we will get to those eventually. And
yet even those are filmed well.
Yeah.
He does a good job with what he has, and that's really, it's kind of like MasterChef when they just get some ingredient that is really hard to work with, and yet people can make really amazing dishes out of it. And I think Fukuda was pretty good at that in the movie department.
Another reason that you'll notice the change in audience demographics and all that with this is that this was actually originally intended to be an adaptation of a cartoon series, The King Kong Show, which had been produced by Rankin Bass in association with a Japanese anime studio. They went to Toho and said that they wanted to make a movie out of this, a live-action movie, so they had Sekizawa write the script. So this movie originally featured Kong, and then that script was turned down. Then what Sekizawa did was, it's like if he was writing this on a computer now, he just would have done the little action where you can do, find replace in a Word document, and just replaced King Kong with Godzilla. since it was originally intended to be an adaptation of a cartoon, it was intended for younger viewers. So, there's that also to take into consideration with this, which also accounts for why Fukuda and these young actors were such a great fit for the movie.
And we can't forget Kumi Mizuno, and she also looks great in this movie.
I
that's
love
another
her in
indication
this.
You can tell they were going for the young audience. I mean, she's dressed a certain way that kind of lends to that. In case you weren't wondering about which audience we're going for here.
Well, and I would also say, she is great eye candy, but she also gets a chance to play a very different character than she did with Namikawa.
As far as getting to be able to play different roles, we also get Akihiko Hirata, who gets to play this villain with an eye patch, of course. But
it's on the other eye, though.
It looks like it looks like he's having fun with the movie, and he's not like, I don't think he's necessarily hamming it up by any means necessarily.
But he's definitely having fun.
Yeah, you can tell that this is one of those movies where, they're still putting a lot of work into what they're doing. They can't obviously slack off, but they're having a good time in the role.
He very much gets to be a Bond villain in this. That's really what he is. And what's funny is he's the face of the villains that we see the most often, but he's not actually, the highest ranked member of Red Bamboo who's there. They do have a general who's played by the guy who plays every general in every Godzilla movie. But like I said, he's the one we see the most often, and he does a great job. I loved every scene he was in. I especially love that scene when Takarada is crawling around thinking that they're sneaking around, and then he comes across Harada's boot. And then he kind of just looks up like, oh crap, what did I just get myself into? And then they have this nice little stare down, and then Takarada turns around to he's telling the other guys, yeah, we got caught. Then he pulls out the smoke bomb in his coat and throws it at him and they can run. It's wonderful.
Yeah, the guy who plays the general in this, they put some interesting work into this because he has his nice little, very nicely appointed dictator office. Did you catch that? They actually built him an office, and they show it for 10 seconds.
Yeah, something like that.
They barely show it at all. But I was like, oh wow, that's a cute little, cute designed kind of office. I think it was just funny that was even in there. Another thing I really like is how the story is set up. It's sort of like I wonder what happens next kind of setup. Various story elements get going, and then they all interact with each other. And Sekizawa wrote it so it's let the story unfold, and that's exactly what happens. We get a nice story that evolves over time, and it's different. It's more, I would say, relaxed kind of storytelling, and it kept the younger audiences interested.
Well, he's showing things that that a younger audience, their interest would be piqued by it,
instead of guys in lab coats.
Yeah. It opens with the medium, so there's some spiritualism there, so that might have been of interest, to a younger audience.
Oh, yeah. Also, the comedy starts right away in this movie with her. They're definitely not. They're being a little bit funny and exaggerated with the way she's reacting.
Yeah, she was a little bit melodramatic, I will say.
Yeah, it got everybody in the mood, I think.
Yeah. And then you have Ryota. He's going, he's the country kid going into the big city, trying to find his brother. He just knows he needs a boat. So he's trying to figure out how to get a boat. And then, of all things, he decides to try to enter a dance competition. It's like this endurance dance competition because the prize was a boat. I wonder if that was actually a thing back then, because that would have been crazy. I've heard stuff about like that with cars, but...
Oh, I totally believe it.
Yeah. And I will say, as someone who is into ballroom dancing, I almost kind of wonder if I could have pulled off something like this. I mean, there was an announcer talking about how they had people dancing for 3 days.
Yeah, that's not 3 days.
I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. 3 days straight? No breaks? What kind of madness is this?
Yeah, it's a crazy marathon. I'd want to win something after doing that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Well, and then they're extremely surprised when everything that he's trying to do actually comes true.
Yeah.
Like, there's a part where everyone realizes that he was totally on the right track, and the other guys that are with him, they give this they give each other this look like, oh, no bleeping way is this. No way. And they express that surprise. And it looks like they actually, it was a believable response.
Yeah. But I have to say one of my favorite scenes in this whole movie is when those boys, because they're just humoring Ryota, like I said. They take him onto this yacht. And they're like, oh, yeah, you want this book? And then they run into Yoshimura. He points a gun at him and says, what are you doing here? Get off my boat. He's trying to scare him away, but then he decides he'll humor them a little bit. He convinces them that he's the actual owner of the boat. He says, hey, if you want to spend the night, you can go ahead and spend the night. It's okay. And then what happens? They all wake up and find out, oh, Ryota set sail while we were all sleeping.
Joke's on them.
Yeah, joke's on you guys. And then it turns out like his gun wasn't even real. It was a toy. I mean, it's like everyone is bluffing everybody at this point, and it all backfires on them.
Pretty much does. But this movie is a bit zany throughout. And you have to think about the time it was made, though. I mean, the network that put on the original Batman TV show, like they had test audiences preview the show. And you know what happened, right? Like, they said it was horrible.
Oh, really?
And then they said, oh, we're going to put it on anyway. And and then it obviously became a huge thing. But at the time, there was a divide in audiences where you had the younger people who totally would go for that. But then you had the older generation, and they're like, what is this? This is so out there. And like, this was Cesar Romero's time as an actor doing his routines. And you all know, I don't want to see him ever again, but that's the kind of comedy that was going well for him at the time. And so this movie really isn't all that risky. It's really going with the trends that were being established at the time for what new audiences wanted. But to me, the zaniness totally mixes in with everything of that time. Side note, you don't suppose this has something to do, this movie, with Gilligan's Island?
I had never thought of that, but
that went from 64 to 67.
That I could see that happening. I remember at least part of the original Japanese title for this was Operation Robinson Crusoe, which would make sense.
Yeah.
Even though Robinson Crusoe is never referenced at all in this, but it's probably Sekizawa being funny with his titles.
Yeah, but I think since Gilligan's Island was such a phenomenon at this point, it really makes me wonder.
The whole being stranded on an island thing. Yeah, it was a thing back then. I really wonder,
because a lot of these Godzilla films are related to something a lot of the time. But I'm wondering if that's where, part of the island thing was to do what? It was to lessen the model building expense and some other expenses, right? Like,
this was the first of what a lot of the fan base calls the Island series of movies, because you'll notice for the next several movies, all the way through the 60s, that an island serves as either the primary setting or at least a major setting within the movie. And it was done as a cost-cutting measure, but I think it's one of those examples of where you can see how limitations actually help the creativity to thrive, because they were probably given marching orders like, okay, set this on an island so we don't have to build as many miniatures, and then they really worked with it.
I think the miniatures in this movie are good. I think the effects look good. The colors look fantastic. But I think it's one of the more impressive movies, actually, for where it's set and how well it's done. I don't know, like, if you look at the ratings for this thing just got savaged. But I think that there needs to be a reassessment of how this film actually is, because you got to grade it more on its own standards. But the other thing with this is there was a lot of water-related work.
Yeah, a lot of it.
That's not necessarily the work input. It's harder to do work in the guy in the Ebirah suit. Like, I don't think I would want to have to be that actor necessarily. If I had the choice, I'd probably rather be Godzilla, because Ebirah has to be in the water and has to do all this stuff in the water.
Yeah, he never comes out of the water.
No,
the whole time he's always in the water.
Yeah, and so like being in the suit and having to do all that. I mean, I imagine they did a lot of work with the in the big pool.
Yeah, I'm sure they did
on the studio. I mean, there's a lot of work here that had to have been done there, and so there's pretty intensive work there. But a lot of time, like working with water is just another thing that makes the whole production harder. It's not something that makes it easier. It ends up making it more complicated.
Yeah, I've heard stories. I don't know if that's what happened in this movie, but I've heard stories about some of these Toho suit actors having to wear scuba gear when they're within the suits while they're doing these water scenes, because you always run the risk that you're going to spend a lot of time underwater.
Do you think this movie is more silly, or do you just think it's entertaining?
I would say it's more entertaining. There are points that I do think it's a little bit silly, but it never ceases to entertain me whenever I watch it.
Especially the sequence of scenes that we get where Kumi Mizuno is trying to get somewhere, and she comes across, like, runs pretty much straight into Godzilla, and then it's like this Jurassic Park thing. She holds still, and then he doesn't see her anymore. But he's a T-Rex now or something. But there's this whole sequence where like all this stuff starts fighting him, like seemingly out of nowhere and out of left field. But it's this extended action sequence. It's really well filmed. There are a lot of really quick cuts. It doesn't look particularly easy to do all of these scenes like this. All the exploding of the planes, and then I love when the bird, the giant
condor,
the giant
that
condor,
comes out of nowhere,
random bird, and then he takes care of it, and then it like runs into the cliff there, and then falls into the water and makes this huge splash. It was really impressive, that part.
Yeah, that's actually one of the scenes where I have the most distinct memories of some of the riffs that my brothers and I would throw at that. When Godzilla shoots that condor with his atomic breath, I remember one of my younger brothers yelling, "KFC, KFC, KFC." Which actually, then when I was watching it this most recent time, and I thought of that when Godzilla blasts Ebirah at the end, or not at the end, but when he blasts Ebirah with his atomic breath, I was thinking Red Lobster.
That'd be the best dinner ever. It would probably taste really good.
Baked giant lobster, thanks to Godzilla. But going back to that, to that scene, that is probably the scene that best exemplifies that this was originally a King Kong script, because Godzilla has rarely, if ever, focused his attention on one human character like that. I mean, he doesn't pick her up or anything like Kong would, but
Godzilla rarely picks favorites, though.
Yeah,
that's definitely for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's if it is some sort of affection, it's very, very subtle, and it's still done in a very Godzilla sort of way, because I would expect Kong to behave differently.
Mm-hmm. I like the music during those scenes too. It was really good.
It's very energetic music.
Mixed really well. I mean, Masaru Sato is great. He is a really, really great composer. Sato is, I believe, a more talented composer overall, in that he was more internationally acceptable and knew what kind of stuff to produce at that time. Sato also did the music for Godzilla Raids Again and Son of Godzilla and Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, which I think the last one is the most memorable for me. But he made a big contribution to the Showa series. Yeah,
which is why I think it's unfortunate that for this movie especially, that I have these two CDs that are these best of Godzilla soundtracks that will have tracks of music from all of the movies. The Showa, one for Showa, and then there was one for the Heisei movies. For the Showa CD, Godzilla versus the Sea Monster was completely skipped, and in the liner notes, the people from the record company said that they skipped over this movie and gave the other ones higher priority because they thought the score for this was unimpressive.
So you're telling me that there's a record company that doesn't recognize taste?
Well, in their defense, they also left out the the Save the Earth song from Smog Monster, which was very disappointing.
Oh. Towards the end of the movie, where there's we have the one track of music playing, and then we have the other track of music playing. They all come to a stop all at once, and they stop bowing, and doing the stuff, and everything just sits there for like 3 to 5 seconds, and there's nothing. And I thought that was really cool. I don't think we ever see anything like that again.
I actually thought that whole scene was just incredibly well handled.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, for this whole movie, we see Mothra, but Mothra never does anything. She just sits there.
Yeah, sleeping.
All this praying and all of the singing and all of that, like we've seen before. And then you have that pause, like you said, and then you see Mothra's eyes light up a little bit, and the antennae start to move, and then the head bobs a little bit, and she makes her little cry. I felt like when I was watching that scene, it's almost like she's saying, "I heard you."
Yeah. Yeah, their prayers are finally answered.
Yeah, it's like it was like this little way of reassuring them.
Yeah, and it's bringing the scene to like an exclamation point.
Yeah,
at the end there, and we start the Mothra part of the movie.
Yeah,
which isn't very long, but we do get to see her at least.
Yeah, there was the sequence when the heroes are sneaking into the Red Bamboo facility the first time.
And they got the bush and they're hiding behind the bush.
I know,
I've seen that in so many cartoons.
Which is
funny.
yet more evidence that this was based off of a cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's funny to see it in live action, though.
I know, it is kind of weird because do the guys not notice that there's a bush that's inching a little bit closer? I mean, they were
going by cartoon logic a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit there. Yeah, it's like, don't never see us coming. But I thought the music when they're sneaking in, I wrote down in my notes, this sounds like Scooby-Doo music. It's like the blum, blum,
yeah,
blink, as they're blink, inching in. Yet more evidence that this was inspired by a cartoon.
And yet it works. That's why I love the fact that all of these movies in the Godzilla series up to now are not animations. Instead, we get to see live action. It adds so much reality to it.
Speaking of that, I want to kind of piggyback off of that a little bit. We had new actresses here for the Shobijin. They're a group called, not a group, they were a duo called Pear Bambi.
Uh-huh.
They're not awful, but I found myself really missing the Peanuts.
I think just perception-wise, the Peanuts are really, really hard to beat. And so, but then it's like, I think the first time I watched this, I was like, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, that's right. But we still have to have the Shobijin, though, I think. And I think at the same time, I think anybody that's going to take those parts, they're going to try really hard. And I think they did.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying that they did terribly.
And it's a different song. It's a totally different song. Sato made it, I'm sure. And because it goes with all the other melodies that are present in the soundtrack. It's part of the soundtrack. And I don't think it's as good as or as classic sounding, as Mothra's song or some of the others that the Peanuts did.
Yeah. The other thing that I thought was a little, I guess, kind of odd. I didn't really notice it until my most recent viewing, but their costuming for the Shobijin seems a little weird to me. They have these floral patterned dresses that don't seem to really fit in with the rest of the Islanders. So my little fan theory is that it's probably something they brought back from one of their visits to Japan.
Yeah. Yeah, they had it custom made.
Yeah, probably. Because they looked exactly the same. And they're just like, that looks way too processed to have just been people on an island.
Well, at least there wasn't anything in the ending credits that said, Shobijin's outfits by Dior or anything or Versace or anything like that. But yeah, it looks.
That would have been kind of funny, actually.
I like the classical costumes more. I think the ones the Peanuts had, but it's just different. And I think maybe it goes more with the
kind of that hip
attitude,
young vibe,
atmosphere, whatever that we got going on in here that we've been discussing.
To kind of backtrack on Mothra a little bit, is Mothra kind of lazy in this movie? I mean, she spends the whole thing sleeping.
She's just sitting around.
She's just sitting around, and
I think in this movie, it's not really as much of a Mothra movie at all. I think it's like Mothra's just one of the many pieces of the puzzle that all comes together at the end, and she's just one of the later pieces to the puzzle, I would say. I mean, Godzilla, it takes a while for him to show up, let alone wake up and actually start wandering around.
Yeah, it's actually one of the things that I find myself really appreciating with the Showa era movies, and with Sekizawa. I mean, he's obviously, the continuity with these movies is loose, but Sekizawa is also keeping in mind what pieces he can use from other movies and integrate them into this, which I think helps to broaden the appeal and really show that there is a larger world out there.
Yeah, it's a continuation of the multiple kaiju franchise, so to speak, for sure.
So Brian, one of the distinctive things about this movie, and it's brought up in some of the the literature that we've looked at for the podcast, is that this is an incredibly suspenseful movie. I've even read one author who went so far as to call some of the moments and sequences in this movie Hitchcockian. And I know if there's anyone I'm going to talk to see if that's a legitimate claim or not, it would be you. The one instance that this author brought up was when they have the button for the self-destruct and they're trying to reach it and they can't get to it and it keeps dropping.
That's pretty Hitchcockian, I think.
Yeah.
Going back and forth camera-wise from them trying to push it, and reaching in, that does work, because I believe they were increasing or decreasing the length of the cuts, going back and forth, and it's like that creates suspense because you have that Russian constructivism kind of way of making it more suspenseful. I think the most Hitchcockian moment is definitely the button.
Yeah,
that part's awesome.
All Fukuda needed to do was give himself a random cameo, right?
Yeah. So this facility that the nuclear weapons are being made at, and the Red Bamboo, they're like a non-state actor, from what I'm assuming here. They could be funded by some other organization or by some other, or even like a rogue state. Yeah,
that was something I was trying to figure out, because who they are is actually left a little bit of a mystery, which I'm totally fine with. It's a very Sekizawa sort of thing to do, not necessarily explain everything, but you definitely get impressions that they're much larger than just this one facility on this one island.
Yeah, there's some sort of covert specter or whatever.
Yeah, when I was
with
watching
their little installations everywhere.
Yeah, I would definitely say that Spectre from the James Bond movies is probably the most immediate inspiration for them. But I was also, while watching it, having some flashbacks to Cobra from G.I. Joe. Now, obviously, that came later, but it's still very much the same sort of thing. This international terrorist organization with aspirations of world domination. I also thought that, I love the name for their island. I mean, I think the official name, because the island gets referred to by two different names, the official name is Lecce Island, but everyone calls it Devil's Island. That is a very James Bondian comic booky thing to do.
And there is a Devil's Island. Well, if they remade this movie now, only instead they'd probably call it they'd have Godzilla visit like Fiery Cross Reef instead, installation built on a fake, artificial island, runway, ships, and you got your whole army that he could fight. Although we know that would never get made.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And also the fact that they decide to build this facility, and just in case, they install the self-destruct. I mean, it just seems like a smart move to do if you are a
supervillain. It's a nice sci-fi trope. You always have to have the self-destruct button to blow up the entire island.
That was impressive.
Sky high. Yeah, no more island.
That
relates back to the nuclear tests making islands disappear.
Yeah. I think now would be a good time for us to actually, talk a little bit about the monsters that we have in this. So our new monster in this is Ebirah, the giant lobster. I know he gets a little bit of a bad rap because he's not a very flashy monster, but I actually found myself being impressed with his design this time around. It's a very well-constructed suit. Looks great. Mm-hmm. And I like the asymmetrical design for Ebirah, where he has the one really big claw that he can use to clamp onto things. He can grab things. He can grab Godzilla. And then he has the much smaller claw on the other side that he can use for stabbing and skewering. Mm-hmm. I thought it was effective. Maybe he's not that much of a threat to Godzilla, because, he fights him twice and loses both times.
He's like the local bully that you have to bribe with a cookie in order to get down the street or something.
Yeah. And his fights with Godzilla are always entertaining. I've been noticing with viewing these movies for the podcast that it seems like a favorite tactic of Showa era monsters is rock throwing.
And it's really good in this one.
Yeah. In this one, Godzilla's the one who does it initially, but Ebirah catches it. And then he's like, "Oh, look what I got!" And then he throws it back.
And then he's like pitching it, and then Ebirah hits it, like baseball or something.
And then Godzilla hits it with his head and sends it back. I mean, it's just it's incredibly fun.
Yeah, this movie is constantly reminding us, "Oh yeah, don't take me too seriously here." Yeah, and that's not a bad thing at all. I like it.
And it's not even just Ebirah's sequences with Godzilla that are effective. The scene early on when he attacks the Yalin, that was really well done, except at that point, all you see is a claw. I mean, there's some genuine terror at that point.
And some mystery, because...
Mystery, yeah, there's mystery and there's terror. I mean, you've got the storm going and everything. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was very effective in terms of mood, in terms of the effects. You wouldn't expect a giant lobster to have that sort of an effect, I think. So that's why I think Ebirah he's an underrated kaiju, I think.
And they're doing something different.
What's interesting, though, is that scene I just talked about where he's attacking the yacht. When I watched this movie on VHS growing up, it was a different cut of the movie. And in that one, the editors had extracted that scene and put it at the beginning of the movie, leading you to believe that you were watching Ryota's brother get shipwrecked. It was really weird. So when I watched the subtitled version of this the first time, because I noticed as a kid, it's like, wait, that has the same name as the yacht later. And then when I watched the subtitled version, I was like, oh, they moved that. What?
They're probably trying to shoe in more commercials or something when this was released on TV. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
But it was version of the cut.
Yeah, but it was right at the beginning of the movie. They had picked that up and put it over there. It was odd. Mm-hmm. We've talked a little bit about Mothra already, but Mothra looks about how you would expect her to. So, and she's not in the movie very much, but she looks wonderful. Yeah, she looks absolutely wonderful. It was great seeing the adult Mothra again because we hadn't seen her since Mothra versus Godzilla.
Yeah, and the eyes are different specifically.
Yeah, the eyes are different, and this is actually the last time we're going to see the adult Mothra in the Showa series.
Oh yeah,
yeah, because she makes one more appearance, but it's as the caterpillar again. Mm-hmm. Something that dawned on me more recently, thinking about how this was originally a Kong movie, we missed out on a chance for King Kong to meet Mothra.
If at all briefly, it would have happened.
Yeah. That's such an exciting idea right there. King Kong meeting Mothra. It's something that was probably the only time that could have happened. You'll probably never have a chance to have that happen again.
Yeah, unless they start making more movies again that have all of these characters going across. But maybe we'll be lucky.
You hear that, Legendary? Make this happen. And now we move on to Godzilla himself. I know that the suit that's used in this movie does get a little bit of a bad rap, and I can understand why. It does look kind of weird, but there are some technical aspects of the suit that I think work really well. I love the scene when he wakes up after that lightning strike, and you just see, and the eye opens up. Yeah. It's like that sudden eye movement, and it's just like, whoa. Yeah. That is, it's jarring, but in the right sort of way. Mm-hmm. I think anyone who watches it, if they're honest, that is genuinely a little bit scary seeing that. But the thing about Godzilla in this movie, as we mentioned, this was originally supposed to be a Kong movie, so they kept most of the characterization that I think was originally intended for Kong in this, because Godzilla is less of a hero in this compared to Invasion of Astro Monster. Mm-hmm. He's gone back a little bit more to the force of nature sort of a thing. He's not thinking about watching out for the humans or anything. He's just doing his own thing. The fact that he's tearing up a base and attacking Red Bamboo is because they came after him first. He's not fighting Ebirah because he's trying to be a hero. he's just wandering around this island and there's something.
He gets attacked by everything.
Yeah, that he gets attacked by everything.
It's our sort of wandering Godzilla, like that version of Godzilla.
Yeah.
He in the storm, we guess, he ended up marooned on the island there by the storm. So then once he wakes up, he just starts wandering around and isn't angrily destroying stuff, but at the same time, he isn't running around in his hero persona.
Yeah. My little fan theory about this is that, since there's nothing here that tells us that this takes place in the future or anything like with Invasion of Astro Monster, I'm assuming that this is probably not too long after Ghidorah the three-headed monster. So perhaps Godzilla hasn't quite, the heroic side of Godzilla hasn't quite taken a hold yet. He's still getting there. He does one heroic thing fighting Ghidorah, but
yes, it's not like
the conversion isn't. Yeah, conversion isn't quite complete yet. But it's interesting because the heroes, when they talk about Godzilla, they don't necessarily like or trust him. They still kind of think of him as it's the same thing in Invasion of Astro Monster. They're still kind of looking at Godzilla as being a bit of a destructive force,
something they can use to fight the other stuff.
Yeah, something they can use to fight the other stuff, but still. Much again, like the previous film, you have this scene where the heroes are leaving, and you are meant to pity Godzilla because he's being left behind. Except in this case, the island's going to explode and it'll most likely kill him. Mm-hmm. So they actually decide. The humans actually try to warn him and say, "Get off the island," because it's going to blow up. Yeah. So it's one of those things. That's why. I look at Godzilla and this as kind of an anti-hero. It's the kind of characterization that actually we're going to get a lot more in the more modern films. Godzilla is a force of nature, but he's still doing things that are to the benefit of Earth.
Another part was where Godzilla sort of itches his nose a little bit. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, and this is, I think, the only time. Well, not the only time, but it's interesting to see what Godzilla does when he sleeps. Later in the movie, he kind of sits down.
Takes a nap.
Yeah, he takes a nap. He just sits down, just kind of, leans his head against, at the side of a mountain. And then one last telltale sign that, things are a little bit different in this and that this originally wasn't meant for Godzilla is Godzilla gets revived with electricity.
Yeah, that never comes back in any time in the series.
I mean, I suppose in context it makes sense because jolting something awake with electricity is a quick and easy way to do it.
Yeah, you're literally jump starting the story.
Yeah. But so it works. It's something you would expect more in with a Kong story.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that wraps up part 2 of the podcast. Let's move on to part 3. You're listening to Kaiju Vision Radio. In part 3 of the podcast, we discuss an issue that either was brought up directly by the film or was going on in Japan at the time the film was released. And this time we wanted to sort of mention the population and societal changes in Japan and their effect on movie audiences, particularly in this case, obviously, for the kaiju films. We have at least 8 long-term trends going on that acted as headwinds towards the Godzilla film series. Obviously, in this environment, when you want to keep Godzilla alive in the Japanese popular culture, the choice is clear. You want to try to sketch the Gojira series to include other genres, other age groups, have some campy humor to entertain people with, or have a kids film, have a young people film, have a classic one to keep the series alive. The alternative is just to let the whole series die, and that wasn't an option. Regarding Son of Kong, like we said before, Ruth Rose said, if you can't make it bigger, make it funnier. And that's exactly what the creators of the Godzilla series did. They created Son of Godzilla and All Monsters Attack and so many other films for kids. And then they did Godzilla vs. Hedorah and mixed things up. The purpose was to expand the genre and include many big areas as possible to keep the series alive. Now, there's a thing where I think people cite the budget reasons as motivated by a different thing, and that is like the idea that executives were sitting around at the boardroom table and they were like, oh, we have the greatest idea in the world. We're going to reduce the budgets of these things and then we're going to make even more money out of it. Well, as far as I can tell, that never happened.
No,
so if it's a pretty bad idea. So I don't think that they would have done that way purposely. But instead, there's a lot of pressure on the series, on the studios, and so this is just we're going in, especially after starting with Astro Monster down. We have a change in characteristic, and then this is where we get more of that, and then it got silly complaints.
Yeah.
About the series. Like, oh, then it just got silly. It's like, well, there's a difference. This and that movie weren't necessarily made for you. And so,
yeah, there's a multitude of reasons for why the series, particularly after this point, progressed the way it did. It wasn't, like you said, it wasn't because they were thinking, give it less money so we can make more off of it. It just, that's not how it works.
As if these people are sitting at the boardroom like, we're gonna make so much money out of this idea. We're gonna spend less and
make more.
Yeah, and somehow make more. It's like that equation where it's like blank plus blank equals profit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, there were just so many things going on, and like I said, there's 8 of them, really, that we can talk about.
Yeah, and in no particular order, we're going to just start going through these. Well, number 1 is the movement of the Japanese people from the cities to the suburbs, which that caused theater attendance to go down, and it eventually started causing theaters to be closed.
Yeah, and this wasn't just affecting Godzilla, it was affecting everybody.
Yeah, and because, in case you didn't know, the studios own the theaters in Japan. They still do. But it's mainly between 2 theater groups that the competition is right now. But this is an industrialized society change, really, when you take it down to it. And this is also related to, this happened in America. This happened in Europe. A lot of people moving away from the cities and into the suburbs, and so the theaters weren't as easy to get to. And that's just a long-term trend that there really is no easy answer to for how to alleviate.
Unless you want to just start building movie theaters in areas like that, which I can actually testify to that, because there's a small city not far from Fort Wayne, Indiana, that never had its own movie theater. So if anyone wanted to go see a movie, they had to travel to one of 2 other nearby cities. So there was a local businessman who invested the money and built a theater in this little city, and it's been there for I think for over 10 years now, and it's been a great boon for that city and for him. He's made tremendous amount of money. So that's one way you can solve it, but that took years to do.
Yeah, that's not going to happen overnight, and plus, when you already have people still moving, that's even harder to do.
Yeah.
So you sort of see why there was they were probably having to play catch up in that department for a while with where they have movie theaters, but a lot of them ended up being closed. Pretty big percentage of them. Number 2 is there were a lot of demographics changes going on. The younger viewers were the ones that showed up more reliably to see movies. And so you're going to start making movies for that younger audience. And then also, if it's kids, their parents buy tickets in order to get in themselves. And so then you get more money out of that. But with the demographics changing, that's why we get these younger movies. And that's one reason why we're doing this topic for this one, is because this is definitely catered towards a certain demographic.
Yeah, it's more or less the pivot point, in the series, when the shift was becoming much more obvious.
Yeah, and like if you were born right after the war in, say, 1946, so if at 1966, you'd be about 20. And so that really fits right in. And it would probably be, the few years after the war. So it'd be what? You'd be like 16 to 20 years old. Perfect demographic to concentrate on. The new class of moviegoers.
Yeah, and this isn't something that's unique to Japan at this time. It's happening in the United States.
Yeah, baby
it's
boom.
been happening
Post-war.
like that for for a long time. That's why a lot of modern blockbusters seem to be written to cater to that teenage demographic, because they're the ones most likely to be going off and seeing these movies.
Including even now it's even younger people in other countries that are the target demographics. So yeah, this is definitely nothing new particularly. So number 3, starting in 1970, the contract system ended and the Japanese film industry went through a bit of a collapse. The thing with the contract system was that this was something that was going on in the United States with studios like back during the war, where you would sign like a multi-year or multi-movie contract, and then you'd be part of the stable of actors for that studio. Now, if you've seen all of these movies we've seen so far, you can understand that that's exactly what they were doing. That's why we have Akihiko Hirata, and why we have so many other stars that keep coming back.
Takarada.
For a lot of these movies. But then that system finally ended in 1970. That stable of actors disappeared for all the studios. And then it made the entire movie industry very, very different. And it underwent a collapse. The same year, Akira Kurosawa actually tried to kill himself. But so 1970 was a bit of a tough year for a lot of people. But
that was also the year that Eiji Tsuburaya died.
Right. So particularly after 1970, the movie system changes even more. And of course, the Godzilla movies, the show series went up to 1975. And so you have to see that process going on in these movies as well, which you can notice. Although we do have some faces returning, it is a different bit of dynamic with how the actors are in these movies. But
yeah, most of the actors in the 70s films are completely different than what we see in the 60s.
Because I can't believe they went that long with the contract system, though. I mean, the United States got rid of that quite a bit earlier.
Yeah, I know.
Number 4 is a really big one, and that is the advent of television.
Yeah, this is the one that people will point to the most in the fandom for why they think the Godzilla series went downhill.
Yeah, so before television, the only place that you could experience a movie was in a movie theater, which that nowadays is so hard to imagine with on-demand everything at our fingertips. But once you take that connection away and you give everybody a television, and everybody buys it through the mass market, then things really change, because they can watch whatever they want on the television that's available. And so then they start going to movie theaters less because it's not necessary. They end up being able to see movies on television.
But this was 1966, which saw the premiere of the incredibly popular Ultraman, also by Eiji Tsuburaya. And with that, kids were able to get a new kaiju every week instead of just catching a movie once or twice a year. So they could get their kaiju fixes a lot more often. So you had that factoring in as well.
And Sekizawa even made his own television show that ended up being a small sort of serial.
Yeah, Aegon.
Yeah, right. And so what this did was it negated the necessity of movie theaters for a lot of people, because they could, within the comfort of their own home, see all kinds of stuff now, instead of having to dress up and then take the transportation, whatever you took in order to get to the movie theater and back and all that. Instead, you just get to sit at home. Number 5, we have the Godzilla series and just, I guess, the life cycle of a series where, there was a Godzilla film released almost every single year for a very long time.
Yeah. In 1964, there were 2.
Yeah, and with a series in general of movies, you don't want to, every one of them has its own life cycle, and that's kind of why you end up with so many different Godzilla movies being made at this point in time, because you can't keep remaking Astro Monster every year. You have to do something different in order to keep it going. But I'm surprised they were even able to go this long with making a new Godzilla movie every single year almost and being able to keep that momentum. That's tough.
Very tough.
And I don't know very many movie series out there that would, like, I guess
James
maybe
Bond
even,
would be the closest one, really.
Yeah.
At least to most Western viewers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are some other film franchises that were popular in Japan, but they aren't nearly as well known over here.
And the most tickets that were sold in the Godzilla series to this day was for King Kong versus Godzilla, which was 1962, 4 years before the movie we're on now. And declining ticket sales are just a fact of life at this point. And I think the studio had to have been noticing this trend already. I think it's amazing that they even kept up this much. But like, I think we've read somewhere that the Godzilla movie was one of the last things they would think about. And they would say, let's do a Godzilla movie.
Yeah.
Because we don't have anything else to do.
Yeah.
And
I mean, heck, that's what happened.
Sekizawa was having a problem where they were like, where he was like, I have already created all the monsters. There aren't any more monsters.
Yeah, by the time you get to the 70s, and they're asking him to write more scripts for Godzilla movies, is like, there are no more monsters left.
Yeah, they've done a whole lot with the different kinds of monsters you can make, and so there gets to be a, not played out, but just a loss of momentum.
Yeah,
I would say. Yeah,
I mean, even with this one, I mean, you're talking about, we need a Godzilla movie. I mean, that's more or less what happened with this. They're like, Sekizawa, you got this script? Oh, it's King Kong? I'll just make it Godzilla.
Yeah. Our sixth reason for why the attendance went down is foreign films, especially from America, really ate up ticket sales. In 1975, foreign films outperformed Japanese films in Japanese theaters. And that trend went for a long time after that, because there's so many just blockbuster things that happen to come out of American movie studios because there's just so much money to make it with. I mean, now that is just a foregone conclusion. You have like movies that are made for $250 million and stuff, and then they make back twice that much. It's
insane,
massive, absolutely massive, and so it's hard to compete with a juggernaut like what American movie studios were becoming, especially starting in the 70s and going into what I call the big 80s, with so many big 80s movies that were being made at the time. But
plus
it's a big drag on the movies that you have in your own country. Amazing.
Yeah, plus the Japanese love American pop culture. It was a big draw as well.
Yeah, and the popularity was compounding on itself by even this time, for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how both the United States and Japan, each of them, their pop cultures were becoming increasingly more popular in the other country.
Mm-hmm. So number 7 is a big one. It's other Japanese studios and the competition that they contribute.
Yeah, because at this point, it wasn't just Toho making kaiju movies. It was everybody.
In 1967, actually, that was dubbed the year of the kaiju film because every Japanese studio released a kaiju film that year. But it's interesting because with the Godzilla series, we peaked in ticket sales in 1962, and then the kaiju film as a phenomenon peaks around 1967. But they still made a film all the way through, almost every year, all the way through 1975, which that's really creating a lot of stuff against the odds here and against the momentum.
Yeah, it's really a testament to the longevity and the staying power that Godzilla had, because he outlasted pretty much every other kaiju, at least the ones that they were trying to make franchises out of. I mean, you had the Gamera series going on at about this time, which was very much for children. In fact, one of Gamera's monikers was "Friend to All Children."
Can't get more targeted with the demographic there. There are a lot of kids in the films too.
Yeah,
that's what a lot of what the Gamera series did too.
Yeah, King Kong versus Godzilla wasn't just the big fish in the pond; it was the only fish in the pond. And then when you get to the mid to late 60s, maybe Toho was the big fish, but there were a lot of other fishes in that pond by that point. So it was dividing everyone's attention and money.
And at the same time, because of that competition, you don't want to have that competition go unanswered. So instead you have Toho saying, oh yeah, we're going to make a better kids film than that. And we're going to outdo you in this department and that department that you think you can outdo us with at the other studio. But guess what? You're wrong. And so the studio had to respond to the other movies that the studio were making too, or the other studios were making as well.
Yeah, it's just the nature of competition.
Yeah, so it's like Toho's getting dragged from one forum to the next and having to fend off competition, which is hard to do, especially if there's that many studios that were doing it.
Yeah, and keep in mind, they're not only competing with other movie studios, they're also competing with television, as we've already mentioned. That was another thing that contributed to that year of the kaiju in 1967. It wasn't just movie theaters, it was television. They were everywhere. It's kind of like how superheroes are now. They're just all over the place. You can't get away from them.
And that leads us to number 8, which is overall lowering of budgets. And that's really caused by a lot of this stuff. And then it also becomes like a reinforcing system as well, because the less you make, the less you have to make another movie.
Yeah, the lowered budgets is really working in tandem with everything else that we've been talking about here, because it's less of a cause of the Godzilla series going downhill as it is a symptom of the larger problem. Uh-huh. It's a result of all of this other stuff. It wasn't just because they were all sitting around saying, we're going to make more money by spending less.
Yeah, so between all of these things, you have movement of Japanese to the suburbs, less ticket sales, so that's less money. And then changing demographics, possibly less money there because you're losing your older audience, and at the same time trying to get enough new audience to come in to keep it alive. And then the contract system ending and money and the studio system having less money as a result of that and collapsing and all. Then the advent of television, that's less ticket sales there. And so many of these things contribute to lower budgets overall because the studio's making less.
Which then required those who were making these movies to do the best they can with what they have. That's why you start seeing them use stock footage more, and they have to change the setting to accommodate for the money that they have, and it becomes a lot of things.
Yeah, and it's the matter of prioritizing. There's still money here. It's not like they're being just totally murdered in the budget department, but they genuinely do have significantly less than they did in the good old days. Like in 1962, early 60s, that was what I consider the peak of the Toho movie monster movies. It's just amazing how much they did. And those were prestige pictures, but the prestige pictures kind of get a little bit rough around the edges, even though this is Japan's and Toho's flagship series. It's still that, but at the same time, there's less to work with. And I think once you look at all of these reasons that are for this, it's harder to just say, oh, well, then they got cheap, or then it got silly, or whatever. Well, they had to go for a newer audience because time's not standing still during all of this. There are massive societal changes occurring. And so I think once you realize that there was this huge amount of headwinds that were having to be encountered, I think it makes you appreciate the fact that, oh yeah, even though they didn't have as much to work with, it's amazing what they did do with what they had.
Yeah, it really is, especially compared to a lot of their competition. I mean, there were a lot of kaiju films being produced here, but most of them end up being eclipsed by Godzilla, even during this era.
Yeah, and it's just because the output wasn't as good, and also it's just that Godzilla, Godzilla is the kaiju still, but the product that these other studios were turning out still just wasn't as good. Is the bottom line, really.
Yeah. You ended up seeing a lot more of their competition ending up on MST3K than you ever saw with Godzilla.
And there were less ticket sales, but at the same time, this isn't because people were getting poorer either. There isn't that reason, really. In 1966, the economic growth for that year was 10.63%, which is giant. Well, I think that wraps up part 3. I hope we gave everybody a little bit more information on just how these movies were changing and how maybe they shouldn't get so hard of a time.
I would definitely agree with you on there. But speaking of Year of the Kaiju, our next movie will be 1967's Son of Godzilla, which is well remembered for some of the wrong reasons, I will admit. We'll get into that in our next episode.
We'd like to send a shout out to our patrons Kyoei, Toshi, and Sean Stiff for pledging at the Kaiju Visionary level. Thank you for your support. We really appreciate it.
If you'd like to get a hold of us and send us some feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is feedback@kaijuvision.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook.
Our podcast is available on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, Blueberry, TuneIn, Podcast Addict, our YouTube channel, and on our website, kaijuvision.com. Thanks to Audiophiliac for creating our theme and bumper music. www.fiverr.com/audiophiliac. If you like our podcast, please support us on Patreon. I'm Brian Scherschel, and I edited this podcast.
And I'm Nathan Marchand, and I'm the podcast webmaster. Sayonara.